Hello, my name's Ed Poole. I'm a member of the Green Party, and we have our general executive elections this summer. And I am interviewing candidates for deputy leader. Today, I have Thomas Daw, who I'm going to ask about why he's running and what he hopes to do in the role. Hi, Thomas. Do you just want to tell us a little bit about
Uh,
yourself?
Yeah, of course. My name's Thomas. I'm a councillor here in North Somerset for the Green Parties. We're one of eight. I'm one of eight councillors here, and I represent a large rural ward of Rinkton, which I've been doing for about 2 years now, and I've been having a lot of fun for it. I've been in the party since 2018 when I was 16 years old, and ever since then, I've absolutely just enjoyed being part of the party.
Can you tell us why did you join the Green Party and why should other people join the Green Party?
Yeah, so for me, it was a mixture of personal kind of circumstances. Um, I mean, I did politics as an A level when I was in school, which wasn't too long ago now. And I was just quite enjoyed watching the news, seeing what was going on. I found it quite interesting. But also, I have quite a large family, and we were affected by quite a lot of the policies that were being made at the time. Austerity hit hit myself, my family quite hard, and the two-child benefit cap was quite a big one of those. So I've just kind of been seeing it as a way to learn from my experiences and put that back into the you know, public local authorities and stuff, and try and ensure that people don't have similar experiences to me. To just basically make the world a better place, the country a better place for people.
How do we balance the need for infrastructure projects and with protecting the environment?
It's always difficult because to build, we end up needing to normally destroy something. It's a little bit of a shame that we have to do it like that. But I think that you always have to look at the bigger picture, the long-term situation, and how everything's always interconnected. I mean, for me, one of the big ones is our housing, and at the moment, because of the way our infrastructure just hasn't been expanded, we're constantly running on a bit of an urban sprawl. So we're building outwards instead of upwards because we don't have the current infrastructure to support denser communities, which I always think is ends up kind of doing more damage in the long run than if we did less damage now to make better connections and make a more sustainable, basically more sustainable community in where we live at the moment.
The UK Supreme Court has ruled that for the purposes of the Equality Act 2010, the definition of sex is biological sex, not gender identity. What's your position on that?
I think the Supreme Court guidance is what it is. It's guidance. It's poorly judged. Um, and it's quite damaging actually to a lot of people's lives. Um, I don't think it's correct. I think they should take it back and have another look at it. But it obviously leads on to this wider question of, what is a woman and how, how do we go about society, who can use what? Well, I think it's a bit of whenever it comes to children is normally the big reason for people wanting to have these conversations. For me, if that is the reason why people are having these conversations, then we actually need to address the issues of, why are women and children unsafe, and how do we make them safe? And which is it is a real issue. There are so many this, um, but instead of actually addressing the issue, it always ends up coming on to how do we scapegoat this? How do we deflect it to, oh, here's the simple fix, and then we've fixed it, and then we'll actually just ignore the problem. That's always my thinking on this question is whenever anyone asks. But the reality of it is it doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect most people in this country, but the people it does affect are the people that are, normally trans women, trans men, who are now going to be put in danger, significant danger, because of this guidance and the policy of the government on it. Um, and I think it's terrible. But you know, also I always like to remind people that actually you look back in history, trans people have always existed. I mean, it's always written about in the Greek times, the Egyptian times, the Romans. It's always been there, and I think it's only just becoming an issue now, like I say, as an scapegoat for what is a real issue, which is women and children's safety.
What do you say when people ask you how we should fund public investment and public services?
We're apparently the sixth richest country in the world. You know, we can turn around and go, let's tax more, or we could do more progressive things like invest our pension pots. I mean, so much of the UK's pension money is being invested overseas because they don't think the UK can deliver infrastructure. Um, I think this is how Rachel Reeves is planning on locking billions of pounds investment, is trying to, convince um, these pension companies that we should be investing in this country. But there are also so many other ways that we could gain the money to invest. We could change the way that we invest the money, and change the way that we spend our taxes. Currently, we invest so much money into building, arms, tanks, defense, just general defense stuff, when we could be spending that money better, to have a better infrastructure here in our country rather than in other countries. Um, but there was, it, to, I don't think we invest enough is the main kind of point. And how we get that investment is, I would see it as kind of, it's a bit of a rolling ball, isn't it? As soon as you start investing money here, money comes back and you can invest it again. And that we should be spending more of our own taxes in this country on making our own infrastructure better. We spend so much money using private companies, consultants, you wasting money basically by using private companies that then take minimum of 20% profit on a go. If we wanted to invest in our own infrastructure better, I'd suggest we do what other countries do, which is spend more money on our army, and then use the civil engineers of our army to make our own infrastructure in this country. So what so many of it, because you have people that are always employed, that are, well, basically it just gives us the team of very versatile workforce that we can use for a lot of things. And obviously it betters our defence forces in this country, that we can rely on for a lot of things and use for any kind of natural disasters. It's similar to what America uses for like their national guard. Like they have civil engineers in there and they're able to build some good infrastructure. Japan, they work this system as well. And it's something that I've always thought would be quite good to have in this country, considering we want to spend more on our defence forces. This would be a really good way to be able to achieve both, both things in that.
What do you think the UK's relationship to NATO should be?
To be completely honest, haven't got, I haven't spent years and years looking into it. I don't really know 100% what NATO, the history of NATO, because I focus a lot more on kind of policies that affect most people in the country, than what NATO kind of is. I think, though, in practice, from what I do know, the concept of it is good. Having countries, giving so many countries an area to be able to collaborate and talk about how we deal with threats that are global, is a really, really good kind of platform. But I feel like in practice at the moment, it just isn't working because it's too politically influenced by some of the major countries like America, England, and it should be a level playing field on how it works as an organization. Um, and yeah, they should be focusing more on some more global issues like climate crisis and natural disasters, and how we protect the people, because that's kind of what my understanding is that they're here to de-escalate conflicts and protect people from around the world. Um, I think they should focus on that. But yeah, I feel like at the moment they're being used a little bit like a political football for those countries that want to deal with proxy wars. So Russia, China, America, and us. And it's hindering its ability to actually serve its purpose.
What's your feeling on electoral pacts and working with other organisations and candidates?
I mean, so here in North Somerset, we're in a coalition between Labour, Lib Dem, the Greens, and Independents, and that works really, really well. Um, we don't get everything done that we expect, but there's always, that room to compromise to have that discussion. But it only works well because we've built it on a very solid set of organizational policies, how we collaborate. I feel like normally when we come into having political and electoral pacts necessarily, we don't tend to have that kind of policy underneath us to really get what we need out of it. The little guy tends to get stepped on a lot, and like we saw in the Unite to Remain pact, that it didn't really go very well. Um, and plus, I think it's really important that voters have that ability to vote for who they want. Um, and our policies don't always reflect similar policies to those who are voting Labour. Something that we see quite a lot when here in the more rural areas when we do elections is that a lot of people switch from voting Conservative to voting Green. It's not always this kind of defined left versus the right. So from us standing down to let Labour take a seat actually might not benefit Labour, it might benefit the Conservatives more. So I always feel that in as an idea, as a construct, it works quite well, or it looks like it worked quite well. But when you transfer it from paper into reality and actually start to move those kind of how people vote and how it works in practice, you lose a lot of that good aspect, and it's never quite that black and white. At least on election side, as in terms of actually forming governments and working, you know, as parties in parliament and on local authorities, they're a lot more positive than that. But we've always got to be prepared and be careful that we don't happen to come across what the Lib Dems faced in 2010 when they went into coalition with the Conservatives. That's the biggest worry for me.
How do you think we can better convey the urgency and impact of the climate crisis?
We have to package it right. We have to show that at the end of the day, it's down to the people, it's down to the voters to decide how we act on climate change. Because they elect the people to then act on behalf of them. And at the moment, as we're seeing, with reform, we've got to make it appealing to voters we've got to show that it does reduce your energy bills, that it does leave you with warmer, drier homes. It does give you a world that is more positive that you want to almost live in, more than kind of what's happening at the moment. But we have to be absolutely strong to that. We have to be to the point, and we have to keep the same rhetoric when we are talking about this, because otherwise we get grifters, far right people, parties that are purely there to just kind of make the profit, selling the country down the river basically with loads of lies, and we're never going to be able to create a more urgent timescale to deliver this if we're always being faced with a large portion of the population that are believing what reform are saying about about net zero and these kind of things. We need to be better at showing that this is real. This is what the data says, and this is why it's positive for you. And to do that, like I said, we have to keep along the same rhetoric, along the same lines.
How would you, as deputy leader, support getting Greens off the ground in areas with little or no Green Party at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, Green Party is grassroots. We do very, very well at council elections because we put in the work, we put in the effort to go and knock on doors and deliver leaflets. I won my election 2 years ago, and my seat was a seat that we've never stood in before. it was, the poll said it was going to go Labour. The local newspapers and the local people were like, it's going to go Lib Dem. It always has been. And then you go on the betting websites or whatever, and it says it's going to end up being Reform. Greens were nowhere. But I spent almost every day of those 6 weeks knocking on doors, delivering leaflets, and I was only able to do that because of the support I had from my local party and from the leadership team. I had Carla come down and say hello, get people out and come and help. And as deputy leader, you have the public side, public facing side of it, which is coming down to these local parties in, when there's crucial elections, energizing people, telling them, reminding people what it is that they're fighting for. That's what I want to be doing a lot of the time. It's what I'm planning on doing is going down to action days, but also social events as well, having a drink, having a chat, having a coffee with loads of members, just to kind of remind them what it is that we do, and really support that. And then also there is the more internal facing side, which is the leadership team has a seat on GPEX and GPEX, and using that influence to try and make more resources available for local members, try and ensure that all of that money that the Central Party is getting in, I know there's not lots of it, but that money that the Central Party is getting in is better distributed between local parties to give them the ability to run those seats. Because as we're seeing with our MP seats, we can't win an MP seat until we've got more councillors elected, and we can't get councillors elected unless we have the resources like the money and the time for these people to do it. And the other ones, well, I'll be massively supporting getting this digital canvassing software off the line and delivered, because I think that's going to be a really crucial tool over the next 10, 15 years for the party. And it's absolutely necessary if we're going to be able to get more MPs.
We don't have a whip system in the Green Party. How would you manage differences between your personal views and Green Party policy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite lucky in that most of my 99% of my personal views align with the party's views. And not having a whip system, I think, is a better way forward, because at the end of the day, those of us who are elected representatives, we're also elected by our people. So say the Green Party decided that they were going to put a nuclear power station or a coal mine or something in my ward, I would feel that I am completely safe to vote against that, and I wouldn't be, I would be using that no whip system for kind of what it's meant to be there for. But alternatively, how do we, deal with those differences in personal views, not just mine, but other people within the party? Well, so we have a very effective system of the one member, one vote, but we don't necessarily have a very efficient process of getting policy through conference. Something that I would quite like to work on is to try and better that system. But also we have from my understanding, we have quite an effective discipline committee that deals with things normally quite effectively. I think there could be doing, now that the party's growing, we could be doing with having the motions of having more members of that discipline committee and expanding those services. But I think, other than a few exceptions, compared to other parties, we're getting our system quite right with that. How do we deal with differences of views?
How do we make a bigger impact with the media?
I think that comes down to a mixture of exposure in terms of how we get the right people at the right times in the right places. But it also comes down to like the characteristics of things. The moment the media, unfortunately, is playing one of those games of, they like people that get the views. They like the people like Nigel Farage. And I think we kind of have to play that game until the system changes. Because otherwise we're never going to get anywhere. We're not going to get on the media. Is why, it's one of the reasons that I decided that I wanted to stand to be the deputy leader, because I thought it would generate hype. It would generate this kind of opportunity that the media would be interested in, of going, wow, there's a really young person there. and it worked already. I think within a week of me announcing that I was going to be running, I was on the BBC. Um, Obviously it was only points west here for the regional one, but still that's quite rare for someone to almost get brought in when it's not something local news, as in like what the council's done for a personal adventure, almost. I think that's the best way to put it. Um, yeah, so I think we need to be able to do more of that, find more people, more genuine. I think at the moment we overuse Carla and we overuse Adrian for a lot of stuff because they're always who we see. I'd quite like to see more people, um, you know, from Bristol and from the north, from London on the BBC, and just kind of having a little bit more of that. I don't want to say personality because that sounds quite bad to our current leaders, because that's not what I'm trying to say. But I think I'm hoping people will kind of understand where I'm coming from with that. We need the energy, we need the life in it, and it needs to not just be us going, well, the scientists say this. There needs to be a little bit more debate in what we're saying with other parties as well. Like what Carla did on Question Time was almost perfect, kind of turning around and going, Richard, what's your science background, and kind of having a little bit of a dig as well. I think that's kind of where we need to get to.
What do you think of the Green Party electoral strategy known as Target to Win?
Mhm. Yeah, so I mean, this is something that I had a lot of involvement with when helping in Bristol to help elect Carla. When I stood as an MP myself in Weston-super-Mare, I've read the guides, and I'm very familiar with it. It works in its current format to get 4 MPs. However, now we are past that, it's very resource intensive. It takes a lot of people going on doors, takes a lot of literature. From my understanding, we did spend an awful lot of money on those 4 years to get Carla elected. And we spent an awful lot of money before those 4 years to get to where we were. Um, but so I think it needs to be reviewed. I think it needs to be modernized, and I think it needs to incorporate, if we have one of these electronic canvassing systems, I think it does need to be refreshed. But yeah, it's worked very well to get us where we are now, and it will work very well for local parties to continue to get more councillors. But for us to get more MPs, I think does need changing, needs review.
What is your approach to people who disagree with you?
Um, well, normally when I haven't found many people that disagree within the party, which has been quite nice. Normally we tend to have a bit of a discussion, and then normally we end up just kind of meeting in the middle, or just going, yeah, I don't think we agree on that, and then leaving it. But for when it comes to residents and people I represent, that one can normally be a bit more challenging because they've given you your vote and they feel there's a little bit more bit more personal to it. So normally my best way is to sit down, have a coffee with them, have more of a one-to-one, completely get their side, and then I'll explain mine, and then just but if it never gets to a point where we think we're going to agree, that's absolutely fine. I can continue trying to convince someone, and they will continue to try and convince me. But I'm very happy to take I'm wrong on this. I'll take my views and be quiet, or I'm very happy to agree to disagree.
What Green Party policy would you change?
Mm. At the moment, we have a policy within our leadership that means that it has to be women or someone that identifies not as male and someone that identifies not as female to be co's for either deputy or leader, and then we have one deputy or leader of like alternatively. I think it'd be really good to take away that barrier for people that I think, if two women were to stand, I think that should be a possibility. I think that's something that we should be able to allow. Um, I would love to turn around and go that, I think that we should do that for the male side of it as well. But I think the party is quite dominated, well, maybe not our party, but politics is quite dominated by male figures. So I think having that gap in there at the moment serves a purpose. But the not having, not allowing two women to be leaders or two people that do not identify as male, um, to me, I think that's something that we could change and would possibly put the party into being a little bit more progressive.
The Green Party has a reputation for a lack of racial diversity. How do we
Mhm.
attract non-white members and voters to the Green Party?
It's very difficult. It's not like the NHS in where you can do a big recruitment drive. These kinds of recruitments. I'm saying recruitments. The involvement of more people, just all people from all backgrounds, involves that initial first conversation. It involves having leaders, deputy leaders, chairs, people within the party to just reach out and have those conversations. Um, from my experience, the party is very, very good at reaching out to local organisations, whether it's places of worship, local charities, and just kind of talking about what it is that we do, and getting a few people on board. That's to me is what we need to expand, and we need to kind of encourage more people to do that, to have that first initial conversation. Um, but Bristol is a very good example for this. And the Bristol Green Party has spent a long time talking to places of worship, local charities, and out of it, we have found some excellent councillors from all backgrounds. Um, and I think that we're not very diverse here in North Somerset, unfortunately, but we're following in their footsteps, having these conversations. And I think if you try and rush it too much, it doesn't work. It has to be through that, you know, one-on-one conversations.
How can we assure disabled people that the Green Party is listening to them?
Again, I think that's a lot of one-on-one conversations, but also then reflecting the the experience that these people have had, giving them the platform to speak about the experience that they've had, and then acting on it. You know, changing how, changing what policy we make, um, and making sure that every forum for discussion on policy, but every forum for discussion, which is just everything is accessible. Um, and it's an environment in which people feel like they can approach and be inclusive in. I say again from my experience, the party is better than a lot at this. However, again, just because we're better doesn't mean we stop. We need to continue to be better. And again, I think that is that one-on-one conversations, opening the place to being more accessible. Yeah, and talking to local charities and communities about what it is that they need and how we can accommodate for it.
How important is social class in politics?
Very, it's it you know social class is just such a strange thing. It's a title that gives you, here is your bottom line, here is your top line almost, and it's very difficult to go up, but it's very easy to go down. And I really dislike the use of social class because it does just create barriers and walls between what someone can and can't be. But it's so important in politics because if we are going off of this is a set group of people, well, the representation for those set groups of people are so out of proportion. If we're going majority of the country is middle class and working class, but then we look at Parliament, majority of it isn't social class, working class or middle class or lower class. It's upper class, and it's people that have more money than I could dream of spending. Um, so in that aspect, yeah, you know, it's really important because if you're grouping people up based on their economics, really, um, and you're then trying to appeal to this group of people and try and get representation for this group of people. Um, but yeah, to me, I think it's just another barrier. Um, Unfortunately, one that we do have to use within the party, and one that is being used on the world stage. But it is just a barrier really to what people can and can't achieve.
What other issues are important to you?
Housing is a big one for me. Given my age, given where I am, I'm wanting to buy a house or rent a house. Get out of living with parents. Um, but like millions of people, I face this impossible choice of, you know, do I rent and spend basically the entirety of my paycheck at this point on renting somewhere? Um, for me in Weston, it's £1,000 basically minimum for a one bed. I don't earn £1,000 a month. Um, so either I work harder, sacrifice the very little spare time I have left, to be able to get a place, or I save up a huge amount of money, over the next probably what's going to be 10, 15, 20 years, uh, to then be able to get a mortgage. But no, housing is such a big one because it is, it's one of those five key things that you need, which is it's shelter. It's where people then be able to integrate to society. It's where they call a home, and it's one of our most stretched resources in the country. Other things as well for me is transport. The ability for people to move and get around. Like I say, the airport is right up the road from me, and the amount of damage it causes, you know, locally to people's health, to the economy, to the environment is massive. And that's all because people want cheap holidays, or they want to go to Europe, and the trains are unaffordable. It's a very simple fix: make trains quicker, make trains more affordable. And I think people would much rather take a train. Um, but these those everything also massively then links into the environmental crisis, which is that saying that as being a member of the Green Party, I'm massively concerned about, because for a lot of people it probably won't affect them because it's affecting everyone at the moment. You can see that this summer, but the real atrocities that it's going to bring is what I'm going to see in later in my life. And I think that a lot of people, um, luckily, will probably miss that. But when I'm in my 60s and 70s, that's when they're expecting that, this is really going to come back and bite us. So, yeah, I'm scared. I think I don't think anyone should be ashamed to say it. I'm massively scared of what's happening. Um, and then I think that kind of the other main focus for me is basing on kind of my previous history and what I said at the beginning is the well, everyone calls it a cost of living crisis. It's an inequality crisis. It's that wealth gap. It's that inability for people to live comfortably now. Like I say, my mum. I'm one of six children here. Um, my mum had me quite young and worked very, very hard to be able to support me and the family. Extremely hard because I lost my dad, and because of that, it creates such an economic instability. And that's something that loads and loads of people continuously face every day, and will continue to face in the future. And I don't hear enough of how do we support children getting out of poverty. All it ever is, oh well, the parents don't work, or people need to work harder, or and the truth is that's just not possible anymore. There's no a lot of the time, there's no matter how hard you work, you can't afford somewhere to live, or you can't afford everything you need. Um, so I want to try and be a voice for those people, um, someone with that lived experience of what the two-child benefit cap actually does and how harmful it is. That's where I would like to sit within the party, because ultimately, while we are a party of what I would like to think of working class, of diminishing that poverty gap, I don't hear enough from people like me on how that's going to be solved. I don't hear any of it in Parliament. all I hear is debates around the economics of the two-child benefit cap, the economics of getting more people into work, the economics of this. I never hear about the actual people and how it affects their lives.
Why do you think you should be deputy leader of the Green Party, and what would you do if you were elected?
There are a lot of things that I would like to do. I think my main kind of focus is following in Zach's footsteps of visiting lots of local parties, of getting that media platform and talking about green issues and just supporting the party from within. He does a fantastic job at that. I'm always seeing him visit local parties and helping people and listening to them as well, I think is a big one because not everyone can make it to conference. So I think it's really good to have someone that represents members on the executive as well. I know that we have regional executive members, but also just someone that people always like to talk to someone that is necessarily higher up and that they that have that kind of influence and change. Um, I think is a real positive for us. The other one as well in terms of kind of why should I be why should I be deputy leader? There's 9 people running. Some of them do have more experience than me within the party on certain issues, but I've been the election coordinator for the Southwest for the last 2 years. I've run quite a large number of elections here in the Southwest. I've supported MP runs. I ran as an MP myself. I very much know what it takes to win an election. Most notably, the most recent one is that I was Mary Page's kind of campaign organizer. Um, and again, I saw what the party can do on a larger scale in a very short amount of time, where we came third, but we came the closest we've ever come to winning an election, a mayoral election that could have actually been possibly one of the that possibly could have been the news lines for that night was the Green Party wins. Unfortunately, we didn't have the time or the resources necessary to do it, but the spirit was there, and if we'd have had another 3-4 weeks, I think we could have had that. So I have those experiences in winning elections. I would very much like to pass that down as well to local parties and through the executive. But also as well, what I was talking about earlier, and that kind of the punch factor of the media. I think having someone young, someone that represents our biggest core voter in the party, that young, economically squeezed, climate conscious, youth. That's our biggest vote share, between 18 and 30. We need someone in our leadership team to represent that. And I think we need to boost that because these are the people that are going to be making their decisions next election. Do I go Labour to stop Reform winning, or do I vote Green because that's what I want to? And if they don't see someone, like them in the party, can they necessarily make that decision? Will they make that decision how they want to make that decision, kind of thing? But also, I imagine the media would have an absolute frenzy with the fact that a 21-year-old from a working class, what was probably quite a impoverished upbringing, is now a deputy leader of what fifth biggest party in the country, would it would do quite a lot of things. And I think that from my experience of being on the BBC, they like talking to younger people because it gets them that voter base, it gets them that watch, that viewership. And then there's obviously also the fact I agree with 99% of the party's policies. I'm very dedicated to doing that. I've spent the last 2 years as a councillor fighting very hard for the people I represent, and I've had some quite challenging debates. And I've with the collaborative of my other my other councillors, I have got some absolute stunning results. We're going to be having just under 40% affordable homes in our next local plan. We're building more cycleways. I've been holding the airport to account. I mean, I'll do this one last point, and because I don't want to drag on for this question too much longer. But I think the experience as well is one of the biggest things. That the experience of taking on that kind of far right reform style of person, that kind of, the way in which they talk and the way in which they patronize people, and how they debate. I spent the last 2 years sitting on the airport committee meetings, holding to accounts, big CEOs that are paid millions of pounds a year to push anti-climate agendas, all in the purpose of making more money for themselves and their business, disregarding all of the interests for the local communities and the environment. I have spent the last 2 years doing that quite successfully, I would say. And I've managed to bring the entire council and majority of local residents on my side on that debate. And I think that's possibly one of the most important things, is to mirror that in what I have done and be able to apply that to a much larger scale is possibly one of the useful things that the party could have right now, in my own personal opinion.
Great. Thanks, Thomas. Great talking to you.